All right. Get out. I have a flippy screen on my camera on this X-T4. I'm finding it very distracting when I'm trying to record a video. I need to fold it away so I can't see myself. Otherwise, I'm not looking at the lens and the camera and you, the viewer. I'm looking at the screen, so I'm just pushing that out the way. Okay, so today, I want to do a quick video today, not nearly as long as last one, but I want it to be a follow-on video from the last video I did, which was all about workflow. And I won't rattle on about that video too much, but in that video, basically give this idea that there's three basic ways I believe that you can go down from a photography perspective to editing, rendering your images. And so the three routes were to not really do any editing at all, or as little as possible, therefore just providing the JPEG straight out of camera. So we call that terminology SooC, which stands for straight out of camera. Or we take the shot raw, and we process that raw file in raw editor software like Lightroom or Capture One. And then maybe a bit more of a more advanced route than that, which would be to edit the image in something like Photoshop, something that's got maybe a few more tricks up its sleeves than what Lightroom can do, or maybe not necessarily than what Lightroom can do, but it might be an easier way, a quicker way to do an edit than actually stick within the Lightroom system. So yeah, those kind of, so maybe it's almost like two, it's like raw or JPEG, and how far you go down that rabbit hole. So in the past, I've tried to do straight out of camera quite a lot with my older cameras, and I haven't always been very satisfied with the results that I've got, which is a shame, because I think a lot of the older cameras, there can be some real benefits to shooting straight out of camera. Quite often we see a bit of your camera gets beefed up a little bit in terms of the specs, but you don't hit the buffer quite as quick if you're shooting JPEGs. The file sizes are smaller. It might mean that even just if you do choose to edit some of these JPEGs, your software can handle that edit a little bit quicker because it's not a huge whopping 50 megabyte raw file. Frames per second can be fast if you shoot JPEG versus RAW. So I think in 2021, it's a bit of a weird one, because I think a lot of modern cameras in the last year or two, they do fantastic buffers and frames per second with the RAW files. So that point, I don't think has quite as much weight as maybe what it used to. But I still think there is relevance to shooting straight out of camera and JPEG, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So it's just all about this kind of workflow perspective from shoot with JPEG. Now, it wasn't until I got this camera I'm filming on right now, the Fuji X-T4, that I started to get my eyes opened up a lot more to that idea. There's a website, I'll show it up in a minute, but there's a website called Fuji Weekly, which lists just dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of what they call film sim recipes. So Fuji's maybe one of the best cameras on the market, possibly, for providing the user with really wide and varied types of images that you can get straight out of camera. And they have these recipes. So Fuji has very in-depth tone curves that you can adjust in the camera, and a lot of different settings to give you something really quite wide and varied and different. But the interesting thing I learned through that process, and I'm trying to apply now to some of my older cameras, is that I lacked the knowledge and understanding of how to really drive a straight out of camera image well with my older gear. I didn't realize and understand the relationship between white balance and choosing deliberately a white balance that might not suit the scene, such as today, it's pretty overcast and cloudy. You know, using something like daylight in this condition can do something quite different with certain other settings in the camera, you know, in combination with that. So we'll get into that a little bit more, but I wanted to just bring up a few examples here of SooC, and then also something else that I've come across, which is termed pSooC, which stands for partial SooC. Because I think there's this crazy idea that when you shoot a JPEG in your camera, it's holy. You're not allowed to touch it or edit it. It just has to be left alone, and I think that's ridiculous, because I think if you're anything like me, you're going to take whatever images you quite like and put them into some kind of software like Lightroom, something that is a bit of a digital asset manager anyway. So whilst you're there looking at your file, I don't see any problems with doing 10 seconds, 30 seconds worth of tweaking a few sliders to get something that's a little bit better. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to look at that next. And hopefully from this video, if anything happens from this video, I hope that the people watching will think, oh, maybe I should revisit this with my own camera, whatever that brand is, and have a look at some of those settings and play around, because you might be more surprised, like I was, to what you could actually get with those cameras. It's not just the latest and greatest that can do interesting straight out of camera. I actually think older cameras can do it as well, but you need to know what you're doing. All right, so let's have a look at some files now. All right, so we're back, and push that screen out of the way. So here we are. Yeah, we're at Fuji Weekly, and this is where it started for me a little bit, exploring this idea of shooting straight out of camera, because I think one of the things that we don't talk about enough is the idea of time and editing. If you have a huge backlog, it can make you feel like you don't want to pick up your camera and take a shot somewhere, because you know that that's going to need edited as well, and just going to add to your bulk of your edit list. And then so you stop picking up your camera, I think, when you start thinking that everything has to be shot raw. And so that's one of the things I think that is quite good about shooting straight out of camera, and allows you to just feel as though you can just take that shot no matter what it was, no matter what's happening, what it is, and just just capture that moment and share it, like, you know, most of the planet likes to share images. So this is I didn't know any of this, that buying into Fuji, that this is what they do, but here we are. We're at the X-Trans 4 recipes, which is all to do with the more later cameras that they have, and they just have honestly a plethora of different styles and looks to the images that they have. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on. There's so many wide and varied ways of, you know, shooting with this particular camera, and it made me wonder, is it just this camera that does this good, or have I missed something and some of my older cameras can do some of this stuff as well? And so that's kind of like the purpose of this video as well. So going back, I'll just find, let's have a look at, say, this one here, this positive film here, as an example. How it works, you know, obviously these are all straight out of camera shots, sample shots here. Wonderful blues and oranges. What you start to learn and understand is that not all of these would work for all genres or all lighting conditions. All right, so because it's doing this to the oranges, it could be an absolute nightmare if you tried to use this recipe with portrait, for example. It's a bit like using Velvia. It would just be a disaster in the film world to actually use that for portrait work. But under the right lighting, the right situations, I think you can get something that's really quite, you know, nice straight out of camera. And so, yeah, these are just the sort of sample shots from this particular one. I like how I love this shot here, and I think it's even boring stuff that just is cool. It's almost documentary, and I think that's the kind of emphasis I want to make about JPEG SooC shooting. Is it suits that kind of documentary style quite a lot. You can see here the oranges in the skin tone's been a bit weird, I think. But yeah, so how it works within this particular ecosystem, Fuji, is you set the film simulation, and then you're setting all these parameters up. The one I want to draw attention to is this white balance. And this is the one where this is a common theme, is that you pick a particular white balance and it's set and it's fixed. So it means it works for certain conditions, and not always the white balance conditions itself. Just like I said earlier, you might use a daylight and a cloudy or shady situation, or vice versa. And that's actually what gets a lot of interesting results. So I took that knowledge and tried to apply it to some of my older work with my other cameras to see what I could get. So we're just going to have a look at that now. I might just toggle me off so you can see these a bit better. Boom. Okay, so what I have here, this is a shot with a Pentax camera, Pentax K1. This is the over here we have the raw file, and then this is a straight out of camera. So there's absolutely no editing gone at all here. This reflects the kind of lighting conditions I had at the time. Okay, so very flat light, nothing spectacular. But in camera, if you set it up, you can push those blacks really black, you can take those shadows down, and you can boost those highlights up. And I think it's a more interesting effect straight out of camera. That's just example number one. This is an example. This was shot with a Fuji. I think it was Color Neg 400 or Fuji CPD. I can't remember exactly the film sim recipe I used, but this is what I saw at the time in the field. And I think that's a nice thing as well, to actually look at your shot and feel like you got something quite worthy there and then. Using RAW, sometimes you know, you look at your camera in RAW, and sometimes you're looking down and you're looking at the dull flat RAW file, and you're going, I hope this is could be a good image. I hope that I find something that works for this later on down the line. You know, shooting SooC is, you know, setting up your camera beforehand can be quite a powerful feeling when you're out in the field to looking at this shot and go, ah, this is really good. It's something that you actually feel worthy to share with a client as well, which is always a nice bonus as well, I think. So yeah, it's kind of cool to get it from that perspective. I tend to shoot RAW and JPEG, so that if I feel like it's a really, really good image then I've got more time I can spend and have a look at it at the RAW file. But certainly, sometimes JPEGs can be enough. And in this case here, I'm just illustrating here in Lightroom what I did just to the file to take it from here to here. So this is a pSooC, partial SooC. And all I've done really is just amplify the initial message, just drive that message just a little bit more. I haven't gone anywhere past the basic panel and the tone curve. Okay, next one, another example. This was the RAW file. This is what I saw at the time in the field, just straight out of camera. A quick 10 seconds, 30 seconds adjustment sliders here to get something like that. Okay, moving on. This one's a good one to actually illustrate the white balance. Okay, so top left this is the RAW file with the white balance that I chose to shoot the image at the time. Okay, but I was actually shooting the image in a monochrome setting with specific settings applied in that monochrome, and so this is what I saw at the time. So you can see that it's really kind of punched out this particular fern amongst the rest, and that was my objective. And then using these adjustments, I managed to get this image here. And I think that's quite interesting to get that. And this was shot with an older camera. This was a Pentax K1 camera. Down below we can see this is the RAW file with a white balance that's more auto, and this actually kind of reflects more like what I saw at the time. Okay, so it wasn't something you could easily walk past. It's blatantly obvious that this was quite a nice shot to take. And this is the RAW file with the white balance autoed and turned mono. So that is what the shot would have probably looked like had I just used a generic monochrome setting in the camera at the time with a normal white balance. So I think these two reflect quite a big difference. And of course, taking the shot from this to here was easier than taking it from here to there, if that makes sense. Okay, so yeah, different white balances to working with your JPEG stuff can be quite important, I think. Moving on, this one illustrates that probably even further. So this is the RAW file with the white balance as is. As you can see, it's very blue, very cold. This is the RAW with the white balance and with autoed and reflecting much more how it was at the time. And this is straight out of camera. So again, no editing here. This is what I saw in the back of the screen. So I've just set up the settings in the camera to being of such that it's doing an interesting thing with blues and darkening those blues and taking them away from the scene. And again, this is what the RAW auto white balance and turn to mono. So this is what it would have looked like with a generic mono. So I'm not working with amazing light here to get this kind of subject isolation of the ferns from the scene. I'm not waiting for sun rays to hit and light up the leaves in such a way that would happen. It's flat light, as you can see. It's not particularly interesting. It's quite overcast. It's just playing around with white balances and certain channels. All right, and you can get something kind of interesting. Moving on, again, this one is the RAW. This is the RAW with the white balanced mono. So it's again that's what it would reflect, a kind of generic mono. This is what I got at the time with a small amount of editing. I was able to just amplify what I saw here to here. So as you can see, comparing these two, you've got some shadow detail here. I'm choosing to try and get rid of it, and I just want to really amplify this kind of patterns and shapes here, punch it out more, which I've done, all within about 20 seconds of editing. So this would be the pSooC. And how's it doing with colors? Okay, so this one's an interesting one. So it's just the side of my house. I mean, not an interesting image, but an interesting example. This is RAW with the white balance as is. So I deliberately had the white balance very warm for this shot. This over here is what the RAW would be if I altered the white balance, and that kind of reflects a little bit more how it was. Maybe a tad cooler than it should be, but you get the idea. But this is a 100% SooC, and I just feel as though the colors are much more pleasing in this one. And I've actually managed to get better shadow detail here compared to the RAW files, you can see. And I've even actually kept a slight vignette. I don't know if you can tell, but there's a vignetting option within the camera to apply that to the SooC. So yeah, it's kind of interesting stuff. Let me see, is there any more? Might be the rest of the shots, I think. So here, just finishing off here with some examples. I'll toggle myself back on for this. So these are all SooCs, straight out of camera. So this again was a K1. This is just no pSooC done whatsoever here. Again, this is straight out of camera, the Fuji. So these results were all done straight out of camera, no editing at all. Now, when I say no editing, I think it's important to understand that you've got a few things to do in your camera to make these shots look the way they do. They just don't happen natively. You've got to do a little bit of tinkering. So it's more like you're post-processing beforehand. I call it pre-post-processing to get these kind of shots. But yeah, if you know, I think they're quite fun to do. You can set them up and have a play, and you can do it with any camera. This one's an interesting image of my son here, and this is where I draw a little bit of a line between some of the film sim recipes, because they ask for some quite ridiculously high ISO settings, even when you don't need them, just to pull off the kind of vibe and effect. This was a 25,000 ISO for this shot here, and if you do that with a RAW file, there's no coming back from that. That's what you've got. So it's a bit, there are some kind of risky elements, I think, to shooting straight in camera. White balance is fine. With a RAW file, doesn't matter, you can change the white balance in the RAW file, but choosing to shoot at ISO 3200 or 25,000, that's risky stuff to your RAW file. So yeah, there's maybe a bit of a limit there, but yeah, all these are straight out of camera, just lovely colors and tones to get. There's absolutely no problem with it. So I think really that's it. I'm not going to really list what I particularly used at the time. I can't even remember with my cameras, to be honest. I've used so many different recipes over the few months that I've been experimenting with this. But I'm just passing it on to you. I'd like you to show me some of your images, some of your work in the comments below. Let me know what settings you've used in conjunction with certain conditions of weather to get what you've got, because I think there's a lot more here to be had, to be honest, even for older cameras. But yeah, I think that pretty much sums up this part of the workflow. Like I say, I think JPEG has its merits. Back in the film days, we had Polaroid cameras that spat out, you know, a film image right there and then for the user to share. I kind of feel that way about straight out cameras. Not every image has to be a masterpiece, and of course I'll continue shooting RAW. If I've done a 2-hour, 3-hour hike to a waterfall, I'm not going to just walk away with a JPEG. I'm going to take that file at RAW and steer it in interesting ways, and I want the maximum dynamic range that camera can capture for stuff like that. But that's not photography all the time for me. Photography, for me, it's intents and purposes. It changes all the time. So yeah, I hope you got something from this video. Let me know what you think. And I think I've said everything I can about this. Maybe in the next video we might talk about what I do in Lightroom, Photoshop, if that is something that I think you'd be interested to see. Let me know in the comments below. All right, thanks very much.